I'm Brooke Landry with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. I'm a natural resource biologist with the state. I specialize in submerged aquatic vegetation, and part of my role is that I run the SAV work group for the Chesapeake Bay program. Submerged aquatic vegetation is also known as underwater grasses or bay grasses. They're just grasses that grow underwater. They are angiosperms, they're rooted, they have a vascular system. They're different than algae. They're like land plants, but they've evolved to live in the water. Here at Mallows Bay, we're in the freshwater portion of the river, so it's nice, not saline at all, it's very fresh, and that means we have the freshwater SAV community here. Submerged aquatic vegetation, or underwater grasses, provide a lot of ecosystem services. Primarily, they provide food and habitat for a number of really important, recreationally important, commercially important, or ecologically important critters that we know in this region. Submerged aquatic vegetation also does things like carbon sequestration and pH buffering, so it's really important with climate change. It also does things like prevent shoreline erosion. So the physical structure of submerged aquatic vegetation in the water column helps slow down currents and any tidal action or wave action, and that slows down the water so that sediments settle out, and then SAV traps the sediments in their root system, so that really they're kind of like ecosystem engineers where they are creating their own good water quality and good water clarity. But they also do require good water quality to a certain extent to begin with, because they photosynthesize just like any other plant, so they need sunlight to create energy. And when the water isn't clear enough, then they can't really photosynthesize, they don't thrive. So one threat is water clarity, water quality, things like that. Anything that reduces the amount of light that can get to the plant. So, sediment in the water, phytoplankton blooms in the water, those are big threats to SAV. Climate change in general is a bit of a threat to SAV because of the increased precipitation. With increased precipitation and more intense storms, what we see is more runoff from the local watershed. When you get more runoff, you get more nutrients and sediment in the water, which then block light and stress the plants out. They really need nice, to a certain extent, pristine water quality. They're very resilient. Like nature in general is very resilient, but they can only take so much. And so when you have a watershed that's being overly developed, when land is being converted from forested to agricultural or to urban or suburban, you're breaking down that watershed, you're changing the shoreline, you're adding a whole lot of things to the water that's going to get washed into the water, and that all really impacts submerged aquatic vegetation. So with SAV and the watershed, so if you think about the whole Chesapeake Bay watershed is huge. You have control over, your own yard. Anything that you can do to slow down the flow of water from land to creek. When it rains, rain barrels, rain gardens, anything like that. Anything you can do to decrease the amount of water that flows quickly into the bay will help with filtration. So when you slow down the water flow into the bay after a big rainstorm, that gives the land a chance to filter out nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediments and any other pollutants that are going to wind up in the water. So anything you can do, small scale locally in your yard helps. Anything that you can do to influence your friends and neighbors to do the same is really helpful and beneficial to SAV. When you're out on the water, obviously if you're out on a boat in shallow water, you should be careful of SAV and make sure not to tear it up with your propeller. If you have waterfront property, it's great if you let the SAV live off your shoreline. A lot of people find that it's a bit of a nuisance, but if you can learn to live with it, it really is a huge benefit to the environment if you just leave it alone. So you can do your part to help SAV in the Chesapeake Bay.
My name is Megan Osman, and I'm a research specialist with NOAA here at Mallows Bay Potomac River National Marine Sanctuary. So today we did a survey for submerged aquatic vegetation, or SAV, here at Mallows Bay, partnering with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources with some of their SAV and natural resources biologists. And we do surveys at Mallows Bay to better understand what types of habitat and species we have in the sanctuary. SAV is a really important habitat type. It provides habitat for juvenile fish species and provides protection against waves and does some carbon sequestration. So it's really valuable, and we're starting to do surveys to monitor what kinds of SAV and how much SAV we have here at Mallows Bay. Over the next year or two, we're hoping to develop a more structured SAV volunteer monitoring program where we can have volunteers come out more regularly, join in on a survey effort like this. We want to better understand the diversity and the abundance we have here as part of a larger survey effort within the whole Chesapeake Bay, where they look at a large scale of how much SAV they have. We can look at the finer scale here and see what types of species, the density we have, and then look at those trends over time and see if there are any changes happening due to climate change or just natural variations year to year.
So I think people should care about submerged aquatic vegetation just because it is so important. It's also really interesting. I mean, the habitat, the individual species, they're all different. You know, they all have communities that live on them. You know, they're really important to the food web. So if you like to fish or if you like to eat crab, you know, they rely on submerged aquatic vegetation for their habitat and their food and refuge. SAV is really important for climate change. So if you're concerned about our future, you know, you want to let that SAV continue to grow because it takes in carbon dioxide while it photosynthesizes, and it's really very efficient at taking in CO2. So I think that's a really important reason for people to care about SAV.
For more information, you can visit our website or our social media pages on Instagram and Facebook.